Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let me start with a simple question. Suppose you want to build your dream house. Would you start buying bricks and cement immediately, or would you first prepare a plan? Of course, you would prepare a detailed blueprint. Without a proper plan, the house may be poorly designed, cost more money, or even become unsafe. Research works in exactly the same way. Before collecting a single piece of data, every researcher needs a research design, the blueprint that guides the entire study.
In the previous video, we discussed how to select a research problem. But selecting a good problem is only the beginning. The next important question is, how are you going to answer that research question? This is where research design comes into the picture. A research design is the overall strategy that tells us how the study will be conducted, what information will be collected, who will participate, and how the data will be analyzed.
Before choosing a research design, you should ask yourself another important question. Why is my research question important? Imagine someone asks, does drinking coffee improve memory? Before conducting such a study, you need to know what other researchers have already discovered. Has this question already been answered? Are there conflicting results? Is there still a gap in knowledge? Answering these questions requires a thorough review of the scientific literature. A good literature review not only summarizes what is already known, but also explains how your study will contribute something new. Sometimes, while reading previous research, you may even realize that your original research question needs to be modified. That is perfectly normal and happens quite often.
Now let's understand the different types of research designs. Broadly, research designs can be divided into observational studies and experimental studies. Let me explain this with an example. Suppose you want to study whether smoking is associated with lung disease. If you simply observe smokers and non-smokers without asking anyone to smoke, you are conducting an observational study. You are only observing what naturally happens.
But imagine you want to test whether a new medicine lowers blood pressure. You give one group the new medicine and another group a placebo, and then compare the results. Here, you're actively introducing an intervention. This is called an experimental study. In simple words, observational studies observe nature. Experimental studies intervene and then observe the outcome.
Experimental studies always involve comparisons between two or more groups. For example, one group may receive a new treatment while another receives the standard treatment. The researcher then compares the outcomes to determine whether the new intervention is truly effective. This is one of the strongest methods for establishing cause and effect relationships.
Another commonly used research design is the descriptive study. Let me ask you this. If you want to know the prevalence of diabetes among adults in your city, do you need to give any treatment? No. You simply collect information and describe the current situation. Descriptive studies answer questions such as what, who, where, when. They may be qualitative, quantitative, or a combination of both. In fact, when very little is known about a topic, researchers usually begin with descriptive studies before moving on to analytical or experimental research.
Research studies can also be classified based on time. If observations are made only once, the study is called a cross-sectional study. Imagine taking a photograph. A photograph captures information at one particular moment. Similarly, a cross-sectional study provides a snapshot of a population at a specific point in time. For example, measuring obesity among school children during a single health camp is a cross-sectional study.
On the other hand, if researchers repeatedly observe the same individuals over months or years, the study becomes a longitudinal study. Think of it as making a movie instead of taking a photograph. A movie shows how things change over time. For example, following a group of children from birth until adulthood to study their growth and health is a longitudinal study. Although longitudinal studies require more time and resources, they provide valuable information about changes over time.
Now let's talk about variables, one of the most important concepts in research design. A variable is simply anything that can change or vary. Let me give you an example. Suppose you want to know whether regular exercise reduces body weight. Here, exercise is one variable and body weight is another. The variable that the researcher changes or controls is called the independent variable. The outcome being measured is called the dependent variable. In this example, exercise is the independent variable and body weight is the dependent variable. Researchers need to think about confounding variables. These are hidden factors that may influence both the independent and dependent variables. For example, suppose your study shows that people who exercise regularly have lower body weight. Can we immediately conclude that exercise alone caused the difference? What if younger people exercised more frequently than older people? Age could influence both exercise habits and body weight. In this case, age becomes a confounding variable. Good researchers identify such variables and either control them or include them in the analysis.
The next important question is who will participate in your study. It is usually impossible to study every individual in a population. Instead, researchers select a sample. Imagine you want to know the average height of university students. Measuring every student would be difficult. Instead, you select a representative sample. If the sample is chosen properly, the results can be generalized to the entire student population. Choosing participants also requires careful planning. Researchers must define inclusion and exclusion criteria. For example, if your study investigates hypertension in adults, should children be included? You also need to consider where participants will be recruited, whether they are willing to participate, and whether ethical approval is required before the study begins.
Now let's discuss statistics. Many students think statistics is something that comes only after data collection. But that's a common misconception. Statistics actually begins during the planning stage. Before starting the study, researchers need to estimate how many participants are required. If the sample size is too small, important differences may go undetected. If it is too large, valuable time and resources may be wasted. That's why consulting a statistician before beginning a study is always a good idea. Would you build a house first and then ask an architect whether the design is correct? Obviously not. Similarly, collecting data first and consulting a statistician later is not a good idea. Proper statistical planning should be part of the research design from the very beginning.
Every good research design should address two important concepts: internal validity and external validity. Internal validity asks, can I confidently say that my intervention caused the observed effect? External validity asks, can these findings be applied to other people, places, or populations? For example, if a new drug works well in 100 patients at one hospital, will it work equally well in hospitals across the country? Researchers must carefully balance these two aspects while designing their studies. So, what have we learned today? Research design is much more than selecting a method. It is the complete blueprint of a research project. It helps researchers choose the right study design, identify variables, select participants, plan statistical analysis, control confounding factors, and ensure that the findings are both reliable and meaningful. A carefully planned research design not only improves the quality of the study, but also saves time, money, and effort. Before I end this video, let me ask you one final question. Suppose you wanted to study whether online learning improves students' examination performance. Which research design would you choose, observational or experimental, and cross-sectional or longitudinal? Write your answer in the comments, and don't forget to explain why you made that choice. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. In the next lecture, we'll discuss different sampling methods and how researchers select participants for their studies. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.